and welcome to building the very last part of the Nators project, and that is the pop-up that I showed you before. So in this lecture, you'll learn how to build a nice pop-up with Only CSS, and this time we're not using the checkbox hack for that functionality, but instead we're using the target Pseudo-Class. But with this pop-up component, I don't only want to show you how this actually works, but I'll also teach you how to create boxes with equal height using display set to table cell. Plus, I want to give you some tools for text formatting, like creating column layouts and automatic hyphenation of words using the new hyphens property. Let's start by taking a detailed look how this pop-up actually works. So you open the pop-up by clicking on one of these Book Now buttons here that appears on one of these cards. Okay, so when we hit, we see that the background here basically becomes dark, right? And we also see then this box here basically coming in, so with a nice animation. And of course, all of this is on top of the entire web page. So even of the navigation button. You can maybe see it here, it's hidden behind this complete pop-up. And also this is at a complete fixed position, so we can scroll, and maybe you can see that as well in the background. All right, so I'm scrolling up and down, but this pop-up here stays in the same place. So we have an element which fills this entire part here, so the entire viewport, and then in there we have this box here, which is the pop-up itself. Okay, so let's start by coding that up in our HTML. And we can actually put this wherever we want on our markup, because it's not really tied to any of the sections or anything. So let's just put it here really at the end of everything, okay? So even after the footer, let's say. And so it's just a div, and I'm going to call it pop-up. Okay, and so that is for that dark background. And then in there we have the box itself. So pop-up, and let's call it content. So it's the content of our pop-up. All right, just writing pop-up here, because for now we're going to leave this one empty, and we'll just focus on styling that background and that box. So in order to make it look exactly like this. And that is actually the challenge that I have for you. So I want you to style this background and then position this white box here exactly where it is right now. And as you can imagine, it will always stay here nicely centered. So no matter what we do with the viewport, it always stays nicely centered. Okay, and so I want you to code that in CSS. And so pause the video now and do that. So hopefully you did that. So let me do it right now in order to show you. So I create a new file here, and this is, I think, the last file that we're ever going to create. So that's good, right? So popup as CSS, of course. And don't forget it to include. All right, close it. And here we go. So pop-up, and we also want the content. So the height should be 100 viewport heights, right? So 100% of the height. The width should be 100%, which is actually maybe not really necessary, but let's keep it here. It's not a problem of having one line of redundant CSS. Okay, so let's keep this here. Then, as you know, the position is, well, it is fixed. Okay, so it doesn't move as we scroll. And then we can use top and left and all that stuff in order to position it. Top 0, left 0. So just like absolute positioning, it's taken out of the flow. Okay, now the background color, let's make it a slightly transparent black. Okay, so color black, let's say 80%. Okay, so that should now occupy the entire viewport. Let's take just a look at that. And yeah, so here we go. Well, actually not really what we want, because it's still here on top of this button, right? So we give it a really high z-index in order to fix that. So something like this, and that should help. All right, you see, so now it's really on top of the entire page. Okay, and now as for the content, let's start by giving it a width of, let's say, 75%. So it's going to occupy always 75% of the container and therefore of the viewport as well. Let's give it a nice background color. and actually not really nice, it's just white, okay? So color white. And actually I will also give it a height here, but only for testing purposes, okay? So we did that before, and so let's do it again. So 50 rem here again, and I'm gonna get rid of that later. Also, we want some box shadow. So 0, let's say 2 rem, and 4 for the blur. And of course, color black. Let's say 0.2. Okay, and now the positioning of this element inside of the pop-up. Well, once again, we're using absolute position here. And now this time, let me actually create a mix in here, because I'm a bit tired of always writing this out. Okay, and so you should do the same. Maybe you already did, because I've talked about this before. So I'm going to call this one absolute center, okay? And so all that's going to do is to simply add position absolute, top 50%, left 50%, and then transform, translate, minus 50% and minus 50%. Okay, and so now we have this reusable piece of code that we can now insert here wherever we want. And I like to do that at the beginning, actually. So include abs center. So that stands for absolute center. Now I could go ahead and open up all of these files and replace all of this code in each time where we have used it. But I'm not going to do that in order not to waste your time, okay? But for you, I think it's something that you should do in order to make your code look a bit cleaner. Okay, so let's now take a look at that. And all right, so that looks pretty good already, right? It's pretty similar already to what we have in our original. Just some rounded corners here missing, but beside that, we're good to go. So what's next here? Well, we have basically this left side here with these two images, and then the right side with this text and this button and this H2 element here, right? And here on this right side, so like this right panel here, we have this entire content like vertically centered. And that is because these boxes here, they're actually the same size. So this here is a box and this one is a box, and they have the same height. And so I told you before that that's something that I want to show you. So how to make two boxes side by side having automatically the same height. So that can be very useful sometimes, and it's something I haven't showed you up until this point. So let's create this content in here, okay? But first, these rounded corners that we were missing. So border radius 3 pixels. All right. Now coming back to this pop-up here, I'm going to call this one pop-up, simply for the left side, and then for the right side, of course. Okay, so in here we have some pictures. So img, then img net 8, and this is simply a tour photo. Okay, then again, and this time it's img net 9, and another tour photo. Okay, also I should give them a class, so popup img. Okay, and as for the left side, we want a heading secondary here, right? So it's an H2 heading secondary, and this one says start booking now. Then below that we actually have an H3, so that we called heading tertiary. Important. Then I'm using like a long dash, and that's something that I like to use, so I'm going to show it to you. So this is another one of these HTML entities that I use all the time. And then just something like, please read these terms before booking, okay? Now in a real life scenario, it would probably not be a good idea to ask the client to first read the terms before booking, right? But in this page here, we're not really worried about that kind of stuff. I just created these parts of the websites and these features in order to show you all of these CSS features, okay? So don't just copy what I have done on this web page. It's not optimized for conversions or for anything like that, okay? So this is just to show you these CSS features again. All right, and finally, just some pop-up text here in a paragraph. All right, now let's get some text here from one of these lorem ipsum generators that I've already opened here. I think I showed you this one before. And I'll just say that I want it to generate one paragraph for me. So here we go. And I copy all of it and paste it here. All right. So that's a long line of text. Now actually I also want a button here, okay? So a dot button and button green, pointing to nowhere, at least for now. Okay, so book now. All right, so let's now format these. So left, right, image, and text, okay? Left, right, image, and text. So let's actually start with the images, because otherwise they will occupy a lot of space and then we cannot see what's going on. Okay, so I want these images to be displayed as a block. That's usually a good idea to do. And then I want them to have a width of 100%. So entirely their entire parent container's width, right? Now another thing that I should actually do here already is getting rid of this height. Remember, it was just for testing purposes. And so, yeah. Now the left part here, we wanted to have a width of 1/3. So basically 33.33333%. And it's not an exaggeration to put such a high amount of these numbers here after the comma, okay? So we can totally do that. And so this one should be the reminder of that. So 66.6666667, for example. 6 would also be okay, so it's not really important here. What matters is that these two roughly together make 100%. So let's take a look at that. Of course, it will not be really good, because now we want these side by side. And the first thing that comes to mind for doing that is to actually use float, right? So let me start by showing that to you. So float left and float left. Could be right as well, but it doesn't really matter because they have 100% together anyway, so that's not a difference. Okay, and now they're side by side, such as we wanted. But let me show you the small problem with that. So it's not really a big problem, but you see here that this left element has this entire height, and then the right one only has this height. Of course, because that's the space that it occupies. So that's completely normal behavior. Now what we want here is that these boxes actually have the same height, because then it's easier to center this content here vertically in the middle of all of this white space here, okay? And so sometimes that's a very useful thing to do and a very useful technique that I'm going to show you. Okay, so let me actually show you how to do that. So it's not using floats, but instead we're going to simulate a table, okay? And so we set the display property on this one here to table cell. So on both of them, display table cell, and then the parent element, which is, remember, the content. So this one here, we set this one to display table, okay? And so this one functions as a table, the content, and then the left and the right, they are both table cells. And then the browser will automatically give them the same height, okay? So let's take a look at that. And well, for now, it still looks the same. So content left and right, but you see that they now both basically here have the same height. And now all there's left to do is to use a property that we can use on tables, or on table cells actually, and this is called vertical align middle. Okay, so let's take a look at that now, and here we go. And so now we have two table cells basically, where this one here has its content aligned in the middle of the other table cell basically. Okay, so let's take a look at that here. All right, and so the height is actually still only 542, so only this blue box that you see here And so technically they do not have the same height, but we can consider that they do, because when we use this vertical align then, they nicely align here like this. And of course there are others instead of middle. There is like top, okay, and so it works the same. And also bottom, I believe. Yep. And so we can do this kind of thing basically by faking that this is a table. Because if it was a real table, we would have to use the HTML elements for all of that. But by setting it using the display property, we are basically faking and saying that this is a table, while in fact it's not. Okay, so let's continue now formatting this, giving it here some nice padding. Actually, this is misspelled here. And another thing that I'm seeing here is that these images here overlap the border radius that we gave here, this one here, right? And so let's fix that as well. So do you remember how we do that with the image overlapping the border? Well, we did it before and it's not really difficult. All we have to do is come to the content here and say overflow hidden. And so that part of the image, which is overflowing this box, will not be visible anymore. And yep, maybe you saw it changing here. And so now it's gone and it works just fine. All right, now about the padding here in this right thing. Some padding at the top. And then on the sides, some more. So 5 rem in here. Then about the text, let's give it some font size of 1.4 only. 1.4 rem, and also margin at the button in order to create that space between the button and the text. Just making the word look right, and so here we go. Okay, so that looks pretty nice already. Let's just add some more spacing here to these two, and for that we can use our helper classes. So margin bottom, and I'm going to use the small and the medium one. Okay, so for the secondary heading, we can add it in here, the medium one, and then here, small. So that should look better. Or maybe, well, maybe not. We can put the small one here as well. So now it looks more consistent. Now one last piece missing here in the puzzle to make it look like this one. So where is it? To make it look a bit more like this one, is these columns that we have here. And also this automatic hyphenation that I mentioned in the beginning. So you have a word and then here's not enough space for it. And so there's a hyphen and it continues on the next line. And actually if you select it, it selects both parts. So that's really nice as well. So if we decrease this here, then we see that even more hyphens start to pop up as we have less and less space to fit the content here. So that's a very nice and new feature in CSS. And so let us take a look at that actually, okay? So back to our CSS, and let's start with the columns. So column layout is something really new in CSS, but we can make it work in most of the modern browsers already. So all we have to do is to specify a property called column count, okay? So we say that we want 2 columns, and so that's all we have to do. And with this, it will automatically create us 2 columns. Now there are some more details that we can do here, which is column gap. Okay, and so in here we can specify the space that we want between the columns. Okay, and the default here is 1em, but we want it to be a little bigger here. Just for curiosity, what would be 1em here in this specific case? Can you think about that? So what would be the default for the column gap if that's 1em? And I hope you guessed it right. It would be 1em 14 pixels. Okay, and why is that? Well, because 1em is always the font size of the current element. Okay, so just as a reminder, so you don't forget what this m here actually means. But in this case, we just want to set it to 4 rem so that we give it some more breathing space. Okay, and then another interesting property here is the column rule. So this is basically just like a border, which will be exactly in the middle of these 2 columns. Okay, so the browser will automatically put it there. And so let's put a light color here. So color gray. Now I don't really remember the color names here. So let's simply put this one here. So the number 2, and where is it? Actually, we can close this one here and the mix in as well. So color gray 2 here. All right, so let's take a look now. Maybe reload it. And well, nothing happened for some reason. Let's inspect that. So pop-up text, well, it's not really there. Why is that? Well, everything should be okay. So let's try to reload this one more time. But for some reason, it's not really there. So this looks like maybe there was some kind of error here again. And okay, so color grade 2 does not exist. Why is that? Oh, okay, probably I misspelled it. Let's just get it here, copy it. Okay, I forgot to call it light, all right? And so usually when something doesn't appear on the page, well, then it's most likely a CSS compilation error, okay? So that happens to us a couple of times now, but now it is finally working. Okay, and so here it is. So here are our two columns and our nice line here separating these two, okay? So let me show you what happens if we decrease the gap. And so at 0, of course, these two sides, they are then touching. And we could increase the count, of course. So 3 columns, 4 columns, 5 columns, and so on and so forth. So what you see here is the CSS automatically balances the height here of these columns. So you see that in the first column and the second column, they have the same height as they still have enough text to display. And then the last one here, where the text ends, well, then the rest of the column here is, of course, empty. And if you increase that, you will see the same thing happening so that the text is always nicely distributed here. Okay. Now I think we have a bit too much text here, so let's get rid of part of that. So this looks a bit weird right now. So maybe this part here, where is that? All right, so that should be better. And now the final thing that we want to do here is the hyphenation, and that one is really easy as well. So hyphens, and then there are 3 possibilities here. So the first one is none, which is basically the initial value, so the default. Then we have manual, so we could say manual, but that's not really useful, because if we say manual, then we can go to our text and automatically specify where we want hyphens to occur. So we can do that then here in our text and specify places where we want that to occur. But I think that's not helpful at all. And so I think the only thing that matters here for this hyphens property is to actually use auto. Okay, and so it will automatically figure out where to place the hyphens. Now, in order for this to work correctly, you have to actually define the document language here. So up here in the HTML, you have this language attribute, and in here, just set it to English if your website is English, and to your language if it's not. So you can just Google the code that you have to put here for your language. Okay, now in this case, it's not really English, this is probably Latin or something, but you see that the hyphens are already working, okay? So they are here, in this word, in this one, and so yeah, so this is working already. And these two properties together, so the columns and the hyphens, this allows us to get closer to the traditional print designs, like a magazine layout or a real newspaper. And so that's why these properties were introduced. And you see that it also nicely changes here, the hyphenation and everything, as the width changes. And so, yeah, this is already nicely responsive, actually. Okay, so just one thing that I have to tell you in the end is that this actually needs a lot of prefixes in order to work in all the modern browsers. So we should give it a Moz prefix. Let's actually copy this. So for Mozilla, for Microsoft, so for Edge, and also for WebKit, which is basically Chrome and Safari. Because in some older versions, it will not work without this, okay? And actually the same thing here applies to the columns. So here we should have at least the Mozilla prefix, okay? So in Mozilla, it's not going to work without this prefix. And so we should add it. Now, we are now doing this manually just because I want to show you that you need these prefixes. But in the real life, you should not do it by hand. But instead, there are nice tools that you can use in order to do that. And one of them is called Auto Prefixer. But I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on in the course, okay? So for now, just remember that usually you shouldn't add the prefixes by yourself. I'm just putting them here now so that you know which property is supported in which browser. All right, and so I think we now have the styling part here complete. And so in the next lecture, let's then take care of the functionality. So basically opening and closing this pop-up, right? Because that's what's really missing in here. So let's move on now to that next lecture. To finish this section of the course, let's now take care of the functionality of the pop-up that we just built. Now the way that we're going to make this work is by taking advantage of something that exists in HTML, which is called anchors. Now let me start by first showing you that somewhere else on our page, okay? So let's see how anchors work. So imagine that here on our tours section, I would place an ID, okay, and also called section tours. So it doesn't really matter here, it can be the same as the class. So I call this one here section tours with this ID. And so remember that IDs are unique, and so this here will be the only section called section tours, of course. And so HTML knows that. Now if I go up here and go to this button here, which we have, well, where is it? Here. So discover our tours. Okay, and so now I can put that ID name in here. So hash section tours. And let me show you what happens then. Well, first we have to actually hide this pop-up here. Okay, so let's very quickly do that. Just with display none. And we're going to come back later to this. Okay, so now it's gone. And now when I hit this button, it goes to this section here. Okay, and you actually see it here in the URL. So section tours. And this is what's called an anchor. So here is now basically the anchor. And we can also say in other words that this is the target. So basically this element here was the target of that. Okay, now I'm just showing you that so that we can later make use of that target. Okay. So remember this, and we're going to come back to it in a second. Now, before we can actually start with that functionality, we need to first hide this pop-up. But display none, as we have here, is not the best way, because if we have display none, we can then not animate it. Okay, so display is either none or something else. There's no numbers, and so we cannot animate it over time. So let's do it in a different way, and we did it already before a couple of times. So opacity 0. And also visibility hidden. Because remember, if we just set the opacity to 0, then basically the text and the content will still be there, just not visible. And so now with visibility hidden, it's also at the same time hidden. And now, how do we actually make the pop-up visible? Well, we just used what we talked a minute before, and that is the anchor and the target. Okay? So what I'm going to do is first in the HTML, here in this tour, where is it? Yeah, here. So I will set this one here to pop up. So this is the button that should show or pop up when we click it, right? So this button, this one, and this one. And then we need to specify the ID down here at the pop-up. So ID pop-up. So when we click that button, then the anchor will basically become this pop-up. So the target, remember I called it the target, okay? So this pop-up here will become the target. And so what can we do here is to simply say, and that's actually it. So we have the pseudo-class called target, which applies to the element which is the target when we click on a button, or basically when the URL changes to having target in it. Because let me show you that to you. If we now hit this here, you will see that now we have pop-up here. Okay, so in the URL, now we have pop-up. And so that is the target. And the target is on this pop-up here. And so we can do it like this. Now all I have to do is to say opacity 1 and visibility visible. And that's it. Now we also need to animate it here a bit. So let's say transition all in 0.3 seconds. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Well, we need to delete this here. And now take a look. And here we go. So the pop-up is now visible. Great, right? So it actually worked. Well, we have no way of closing it right now, but we will take care of that later. Let me show it again to you. I think the animation wasn't working quite well. but the functionality at least, that is on point already. So it's working already right now. Okay, and the animation was not working because of these 0.3. I was missing the second here, but again, the functionality is just fine. So let me recap what happens here, so that we're 100% on the same page. So we have this button here, right? And so this one here. So we click this one here, and then as soon as we click, this here gets added to the URL of the page, okay? And so hash popup becomes the target. Okay, but since this one here has the ID of popup, the target is basically this entire element, okay? And so as soon as this element becomes the target, the pseudo-class called target is available on it. And so we can then select that element using that pseudo-class as we did here, and then specify our styles on it. And that's all we did. And as you see, it's working quite well. Now what we need next is a way of closing this popup. So let's actually put that here in the HTML. So we need like a small button. And so let's put that in here actually. So an anchor tag and popup close. Now the href here, it will be actually called section tours. Okay, and why is that? Well, because when we hit this link here, it will move to the section tours, okay, just as we did with the other button, and then this will become the target, right? And if the section tours becomes the target, then the popup is no longer the target, meaning that the pseudo-class here no longer applies, and then that means, of course, that these styles disappear and the popup will be hidden again. So back to the initial state. All right, did that make sense? So basically what this closing button will do is to remove the target from the popup, so that it simply loses these styles and then is back to its initial closed state. Okay, so let's now style that closing element. And actually we should put some text here. We just left it empty. And instead of putting a real icon here or something, I will just use another HTML entity, and it's called times. And that's basically like an X, okay? So popup close, and here it is. So if I now hit this one, and I think this H2 is now on top of it, but let's try it. No, it's not working because this is on top. So we first need to actually style it and position it. So popup close, and it's here already. And so let's do some positioning of this link. So we want the link state and the visited state. The color should be, well, the color of the text. I think we have a variable for that. Or actually not, I think. But it's here. I think this simply this color. All right, so color gray dark. Then the position should be absolute. We will want it 2.5 rem from the top and from the right. So basically in the top right corner. Let's increase it. And so 3 rem. And of course we want no text decoration. And it should also be displayed as an inline block. Okay, and then as soon as we hover it, it should just become green, so color primary. So let's take a look at that now. Well, we set the position here to absolute, and so it will be positioned to its first positioned parent. So which one is that? Well, it is actually the popup itself. Or isn't it? No, I think it's not, because the parent of this one here is the popup right, which doesn't have a defined position, but then the popup content has. And so it will be positioned relative to the popup content, which is fine. So we don't need to specify the position property on its parent element, okay? So let's just check this out. And here we go. And it actually worked already, right? So now here the target is section tours, and that means that the popup gets closed because, of course, the target is no longer the popup. All right, now it's not already positioned the way we want it to be, and it's not becoming green, but that's a minor problem that we can fix now. So the color Of course, the problem is this one. And now as for the position, let's take a look at that again. So turning green now, but let's inspect it. And yeah, I see why that's happening. It's because you see it's really high, this element. It's much higher than actually the X symbol itself is. And that's because this is text. And so it has this predefined line height that we defined. So we should just set the line height to 1. And then it will actually be exactly here in the place where we want it to be. All right. So it now opens and closes just fine. But there's still one minor difference here, and that's this one. Take a look at the box now. So you see it basically it's coming in towards the user from the back of the page, zooming in towards us. So how do we do that? Well, that's actually very easy. Let's just go back here and well, let me take this code and put it a bit more down where it's more logical to be. So down here. So we want to style the content here, right? At the moment where the pop-up is opening. Well, and when does that happen? Well, of course, when the pop-up becomes the target. Of course, not that one. So, makes sense? Again, the pop-up here becomes the target, and then we simply style the child element of the pop-up, which is called pop-up content. Okay? So what should the initial state of this content be? Well, it's basically scaled down and it's also invisible, right? And so let's start by putting the opacity to 0 and we scale it. Now I'm going to put a transform here and scale, but it's not going to work. And I'm going to show you why. But I hope that you can already imagine why it's not going to work. Okay, because we actually ran into this problem before. So let me just show it to you. Well, that's the original, of course. That was stupid. So just so we can see it, let me show it to you. And so it's here. It's actually scaled down, but it's down here, where it should not really be, right? So let me inspect it and show it to you why it's happening this way. So the content here, reload it, and yeah, all right. So you see why it's happening? Because we have defined this transform here, but we already had one transform. And you can only have one transform or one property in each declaration block, of course. And so this one here appears last, and therefore it overrides this one. Okay, so let's fix that. And we know that this transform actually comes from this absolute center. So what do we do when we want two transforms at the same time? Well, we have to put them in the same. And so we're basically repeating the one that we have coming from our mixin, but that's the only way that we have here to do it this way. Okay, and so now it should look all right. Okay, and now all we have to do is to then scale it back to 100% as soon as the pop-up opens. Okay, so let's do that. So the opacity is 0, so it's invisible, and then we put it back to 1 and scale it back to 1. Okay, so these here are basically the open states. So these two is when the pop-up is open, and that's when it's at the exact position with the perfect size, the perfect opacity, and of course the same thing here for the pop-up container, basically. All right, and with that, we're almost good to go, I believe. We just have to add the animation here. So transition, all 0.4 seconds, let's say. So let's take a look at that now. All right, I just want to add something here to show you, and that's a small delay. So remember, transition is just a shorthand for a bunch of transition-related properties, and one of them is transition delay. And so we can just delay this transition here by 0.2 seconds. So basically with this, we first allow the black background to come in, and then after that, we fade in our pop-up box, okay? So our pop-up content here. Well, it's actually not exactly after the pop-up fades in because that takes 0.3 seconds, but point 2 is absolutely fine here. So we don't have to wait all the way until it's completely fade in. So let's try that now. And yeah, so I think that actually looks better. Then maybe we can even start from something smaller here than 0.5. Let's say how it looks like with 0 and fading it in through half a second. So again, we can experiment with this, make it look like we want. And yeah, I like that one as well. Let's take a look again. All right, I think that works as well too. Maybe it's a bit too much, so let's put 0.25, but with that we should be good to go. Then again, you can change these values for yourself if you want to, but I really like it this way. All right, and with that we finished this huge part of the project. So almost 25 lectures, I believe, is this section. And so I'm really glad that you're still sticking with me here at this point. It's really good that you coded this entire web page here. And so I hope that you really feel this sense of accomplishment after creating such a huge project, okay? So really great job, and congratulations for that. However, we are not really done with this project, okay? Because right now it works on a big screen like this one. But what happens if we would see this on a mobile device? So what happens if we have a smaller screen like this? Well, then this is really a disaster, right? It doesn't look good at all. It's terrible, really. And so since this course is on advanced CSS and responsive design, I'm going to teach you how to make this design responsive over the next section, including a topic called responsive images, which is actually a pretty advanced topic. And so there's a lot more coming up in the next section. Really great content again. And so yeah, hope to see you there, and I'm waiting for you there.